In the far reaches of the galaxy, there was a quiet that had lasted for years. The Galactic Empire ruled over almost everything, its ships and armies spreading across star systems like a dark shadow. Humans, a young species in the eyes of the Empire, had never been seen as a real threat. They were small in number and lacking the power of the Empire's fleets. The Empire thought they could control every corner of the galaxy. Yet, on the edge of Empire space, one human ship stood in silence, floating against the backdrop of the stars. It was a ship like no other. The Lance, a marvel of human engineering. The ship was small compared to the vast warships of the Empire, but it held something powerful, something the Empire did not expect. The Lance was a prototype, built with the latest technology from human scientists and engineers. The ship had been created in secret, far from the prying eyes of the Empire. Inside, its crew was small but determined. They knew their mission: to stand against the Empire's might, to defend what little was left of humanity. The crew of the Lance was led by Captain Mark, a man of experience and calm under pressure. Mark had been in the military for years, rising through the ranks to command the Lance. He was known for his quick thinking and his ability to lead in even the most difficult of situations. With a square jaw and eyes that had seen too many battles, Mark was a leader who inspired his crew to trust him completely. Beside him was his second-in-command, Ella. Ella was younger than Mark, but just as capable. She had a sharp mind and a strong will. Her quick decisions in battle were as important as Mark's leadership. Together, they formed a team that was unmatched in their determination to protect humanity. The mission they faced was one of great risk. The Empire was gathering its forces to destroy the last human stronghold, a small colony on the outer rim of the galaxy. The Dread Armada, the Empire's largest fleet, was on its way. It was said to be unstoppable, made up of massive warships that could wipe out entire planets with a single blow. The humans had no chance against such power, or so the Empire believed. But the crew of the Lance knew something the Empire did not. The Lance was not just another ship. It was armed with a new kind of weapon, something powerful enough to change the course of the war. The weapon was a prototype energy cannon, capable of destroying an entire fleet with a single shot. However, it was still untested. The crew had only one chance to use it, and they had to make it count. The ship moved slowly through the galaxy, far from the Empire's eyes. The silence in the cockpit was thick, as everyone on board knew the stakes. Mark stood at the bridge, looking out at the stars, his mind focused on the mission ahead. His hands rested on the controls as he thought about what lay ahead. Ella stood beside him, her eyes on the readouts, watching for any sign of danger. "Everything's clear for now," Ella said quietly, her voice calm but tense. "We've got time before they find us." Mark nodded, but he knew it wouldn't last. The Empire was always watching. The Dread Armada would be on them soon, and when it arrived, there would be no turning back. "We'll be ready," Mark said, his voice steady. "Prepare the crew. Everyone needs to be on high alert." As he gave the orders, the crew of the Lance moved quickly and efficiently. Each person knew their role. Every decision could mean life or death. The crew had trained for this moment for years, but no amount of training could prepare them for the battle they were about to face. Mark knew that the chances of survival were slim, but he also knew that they could not back down. The Empire would not stop until humanity was wiped out, and if the Lance fell, so would the hope of survival for the human race. He had to trust in the ship, in his crew, and in the weapon they carried. Outside, the stars continued to shine, unaware of the war that was brewing just beyond the horizon. The Lance moved forward, ready to face the Empire's might. And though the crew knew that this would be a fight like no other, they also knew that they were not fighting just for survival. They were fighting for the future of humanity. In the stillness of space, the Lance prepared for what was coming. The battle would soon begin, and with it, the fate of the galaxy would be decided. Would this small human ship be able to take on the mightiest fleet the galaxy had ever known? Only time would tell. The Lance floated in the dark vastness of space, its sleek form almost invisible against the backdrop of stars. For now, it was safe, hidden from the watchful eyes of the Empire. But its crew knew the peace would not last. In the coming days, they would face the full force of the Empire's power. Captain Mark stood on the bridge, his eyes focused on the holographic map in front of him. It showed the locations of enemy ships, their paths, and the movements of the Dread Armada. The map seemed to grow more crowded every time he checked. The Empire's fleet was getting closer, and Mark knew they had little time left. Beside him, Ella checked the ship's systems, her fingers moving quickly over the console. She was a brilliant engineer, one of the best the human colonies had to offer. She had worked tirelessly on the Lance's systems, making sure everything was ready for the battle ahead. "We're running low on time," Ella said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "The Armada will be in range in less than 20 hours. Mark nodded. He understood the gravity of the situation. The Dread Armada was an overwhelming force. Even the Lance, with all its advanced technology, couldn't hope to match it in a head-to-head fight. The human ship had speed, agility, and one secret weapon, an energy cannon that could destroy entire fleets. But this weapon was still untested, and they had no way of knowing if it would work as intended. The weapon was the result of years of research by human scientists, who had pushed their minds and technology to the limit to create something that could fight back against the Empire's unstoppable might. The cannon was capable of firing a concentrated blast of energy that could tear through the thickest armor and obliterate anything in its path. It was a marvel of human ingenuity, built from stolen knowledge, desperation, and the will to survive. But there was a problem. The cannon had never been used in combat. There were risks. The blast was powerful, but it required precise calibration and perfect timing. Even a small mistake could cause the weapon to fail, or worse, destroy the Lance itself. Mark didn't have the luxury of doubt. He had to trust in the weapon, in Ella's ability to get it working, and in the courage of his crew. "Ella, are we ready?" Mark asked, his voice steady but tinged with the pressure of the moment. Ella hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "The cannon is fully charged, but we still need to make final adjustments. It'll take about 6 hours to calibrate it correctly. After that, we'll be ready, if everything goes as planned." Mark turned back to the map, his mind racing. He knew this was their only shot. Once the Dread Armada arrived, there would be no turning back. If the cannon didn't work, the Lance would be destroyed, and humanity's hope would vanish with it. "We'll do what we can," Mark said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Keep me updated on the cannon's status. If we have to adjust the plan, we will. But no matter what, we stand and fight." Ella nodded, her expression determined. "Understood, Captain." The crew of the Lance was ready. Each person had their role to play, and every task had to be done perfectly. The tension was thick, but there was also a quiet sense of resolve. They all knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about saving their lives. It was about protecting the future of humanity. In the crew quarters, Lieutenant Sam, the ship's communications officer, was double-checking the systems. He had already sent out several signals, trying to gather information about the Empire's movements. The Empire had sophisticated surveillance systems, but the Lance was built to be stealthy. Sam's job was to make sure the ship stayed hidden until the right moment. Meanwhile, in the engine room, Technician Luke was monitoring the ship's power systems. He and his team worked around the clock to keep the Lance running smoothly. Every part of the ship was vital, and Luke understood that his team's work would make all the difference when the battle came. If the engines failed, or if the weapons systems malfunctioned, they would be sitting ducks. Luke wasn't going to let that happen. Back on the bridge, Mark looked out the window. He could see distant stars, cold and indifferent. He thought of the families back on Earth and the colonies, of the people who were depending on the crew of the Lance to stop the Empire. "We can do this," Mark muttered to himself. "We have to." As the hours ticked down, the crew continued their work. There was little time left to prepare, but they all knew what they had to do. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and the lance was their last hope. With the energy cannon nearly ready, Mark felt a mix of hope and fear. He trusted his crew, but the weight of their mission was heavy. They were about to face the Dread Armada, the mightiest fleet in the galaxy, and all they had was one shot, and that shot would have to count. The silence of space was broken only by the hum of the Lance's engines. As the small human ship drifted deeper into the galaxy, its crew knew that time was running out. The Dread Armada, the Empire's most powerful fleet, was closing in. It was only a matter of time before the Empire would find them. They had to act before that happened. On the bridge, Captain Mark stood beside Ella, his second in command. The weight of their mission was heavy on his shoulders, but his face remained calm. He had led his crew through many difficult situations, but this was unlike anything they had faced before. The Dread Armada was a beast, a fleet of unimaginable power, and they would be outnumbered and outgunned. "How much longer until they reach us?" Mark asked, his voice steady. Ella glanced at the sensor readings. "It won't be long. The fleet is moving fast. We'll have to make a choice soon." Mark nodded, his eyes narrowing. He had been thinking about that choice for hours. They could try to outrun the fleet, using the Lance's speed and agility to escape. But the Dread Armada was too large and too fast. If they tried to flee, the chances of surviving were slim. No, they needed to stand and fight. "Prepare the crew," Mark said firmly. "We'll face them head-on. It's the only chance we have." Ella didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll make sure the cannon is ready." As the crew moved to their stations, Mark felt a sense of unease. The Lance was an advanced ship, but it was small compared to the Empire's warships. It was designed for speed and stealth, not for full-scale combat. They had one advantage, the energy cannon. But Mark knew it was still untested. If it failed, they were done for. "Sam," Mark called, turning to the communications officer, "I need you to keep an eye on enemy signals. Let us know if they detect us." Sam, who had been busy scanning the area, nodded. "I'm on it, Captain. We're still under their radar for now, but that won't last." The tension on the bridge was palpable. Everyone was focused, knowing that their survival depended on how well they executed their plan. Mark glanced at the star map on the screen. The Dread Armada was getting closer. They had no time to waste. Then, without warning, Sam's voice broke the silence. "Captain, the enemy fleet has entered our range. They're about to find us." Mark's heart raced. They had no more time to prepare. "All hands, prepare for battle," he ordered. The crew moved quickly, taking their positions. Ella worked quickly to fine-tune the energy cannon, making last-minute adjustments. The ship's engines roared to life as the Lance began to accelerate, moving into position for what would be their only chance at survival. Outside, the stars seemed to shimmer in the darkness, their cold light casting shadows on the ships that moved toward them. The Dread Armada appeared on the sensors. A massive fleet, dozens of ships, all larger and more heavily armed than the Lance. The Empire had sent everything they had. Mark knew that if they didn't succeed, they would all die. The first enemy ship came into view, a massive warship, its hull covered in thick armor. It was followed by several more, each ship bristling with weapons. Mark took a deep breath, his fingers tightening on the controls. "Ready the cannon," he ordered. Ella's voice came through the comms. "Charging the cannon now. It's going to take a few seconds to reach full power." Mark nodded. He didn't have a few seconds. They had to act fast. "Full speed ahead," he ordered. The Lance shot forward, dodging incoming fire from the enemy ships. Mark's hands flew over the controls, guiding the ship in quick, sharp turns. The Lance was fast, faster than anything the Empire had, but it couldn't dodge forever. The first few blasts from the enemy ships missed, But soon, they would be in range again. "Ella," Mark called. "How much longer?" "5 more seconds," Ella replied, her voice tight with focus. The lance flew between 2 enemy ships, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He had to keep them moving, keep them alive long enough for the cannon to charge. 3 seconds, Ella said. The tension was unbearable. Mark could hear the whine of the cannon powering up. It was ready, but they needed a clean shot. The dread armada was closing in. "Now, Ella," Mark shouted. With a final surge of power, the lance fired the energy cannon. A bright beam of light shot out from the ship, cutting through the darkness of space. It struck the nearest enemy warship with a deafening crack, the blast tearing through its armor like paper. The ship exploded in a burst of fire and debris, its wreckage scattering into space. For a moment, everything was still. The crew of the Lance stared at the results on the screen, disbelief in their eyes. They had done it. The energy cannon had worked. But there was no time to celebrate. The rest of the enemy fleet was still coming. The moment the enemy warship exploded, a wave of hope surged through the crew of the Lance. The energy cannon had worked. It had taken down the massive ship with a single shot. For a brief moment, it seemed as though they had a chance, maybe even a chance to win. But Captain Mark didn't let himself feel relief. The dread armada was far from finished. In fact, it had only just begun to fight back. As the blast from the Lance's cannon echoed across space, the rest of the armada shifted into position. They had seen the power of the human ship, and they weren't about to let it take out any more of their fleet. A large ship, the Inferno, broke away from the main formation and moved forward, its massive guns trained on the Lance. "Brace for impact," Mark shouted, gripping the controls as the Lance darted to the side to avoid the first blast from the Inferno. It was no easy task. The ship's size and speed were far greater than their own, and it could launch a storm of weapons in seconds. The Lance shook as it barely dodged a second shot, but Mark knew it wouldn't be long before the Inferno found its mark. Their small ship could outmaneuver most, but not the sheer firepower of the Empire's flagship. They needed to fight back, and quickly. "Ella, is the cannon ready?" Mark asked, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. Ella's voice came through, strained but steady. "We're charging it again. It'll be ready in 5 minutes, but we need to make it count." 5 minutes. They didn't have 5 minutes. The Inferno was closing in, its massive guns charging up for another strike. "Keep dodging, Captain. I'll do what I can with the engines." Luke, the ship's lead technician, called out from the engine room. "Just give me a little more time." Mark nodded and pulled the ship into a tight turn. Using every ounce of speed, the Lance had to avoid the next volley. He could feel the ship's power beneath him, but the Lance was no match for the weight of the Empire's might. "We need to buy time," Mark muttered under his breath. He thought quickly, his mind racing with ideas. The Lance was fast, but it couldn't outrun the Inferno for long. The energy cannon could destroy the flagship, but only if they could get close enough and fire in one perfect shot. But how could they survive long enough for that to happen? Then Mark had an idea. "Ella, I need you to overload the engines," he said, his voice steady as he quickly explained his plan. "Are you crazy?" Ella asked. Overloading the engines would. "It'll buy us time," Mark interrupted. "We don't have a choice. Do it." Ella hesitated for a moment, but then she responded with determination. "Understood. Overloading now." Back on the bridge, Mark's eyes never left the approaching Inferno. He could feel the pressure building. The Lance was about to be surrounded. The Empire wasn't going to let them escape. The fight was becoming impossible. "Captain." Sam, the communications officer, shouted from his station. "The Inferno is calling in reinforcements. More ships are coming in." Mark's heart sank. The situation was becoming even worse. They would soon be facing twice the number of ships they had already. But there was no turning back now. "Luke," Mark said, turning to the tech officer. "Get ready for an emergency jump. As soon as we have the energy, we leave." "We're not running away, are we, Captain?" Luke asked, a little confused. "No," Mark replied. "We're not running. We're going to use the overload to get close enough to hit them with everything we've got." The Lance's engines roared as the overload began. The ship shook with the extra power coursing through its systems, and the strain was almost unbearable. Mark held tight to the controls, using every ounce of concentration to keep the ship on course. In the distance, the Inferno fired again, narrowly missing. Mark had no idea how long they could keep dodging, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon. The Lance was almost ready to strike. "Ella, how much longer?" he asked, his voice tense. "Just a few more seconds," she replied. "The cannon is almost fully charged." The Inferno was close now. Mark could see the massive ship in his sights. He could almost feel its enormous firepower ready to crush them. But he had no intention of letting that happen. "Now," Mark shouted. "Fire!" Ella pulled the trigger, and once again, the energy cannon roared to life. A brilliant beam of light shot from the Lance and struck the Inferno. The blast was unlike anything the crew had seen before. The Empire's flagship took the full force of the blast, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a thunderous explosion, the Inferno tore apart, its massive hull cracking and breaking apart into pieces. The crew stared in shock at what they had done. The Inferno, the heart of the Dread Armada, was no more. But Mark knew it wasn't over. The Lance was now a target, and the rest of the fleet would be coming for them. The explosion of the Inferno echoed across the stars, a shockwave of energy that sent ripples through the surrounding ships. For a brief moment, the crew of the Lance could hardly believe what they had done. They had destroyed the flagship of the Dread Armada, the Empire's most powerful vessel, with one perfect shot. But there was no time to celebrate. Mark's heart raced as he watched the remaining ships of the Armada begin to regroup. The destruction of the Inferno had thrown them into disarray, but that wouldn't last for long. They would retaliate with everything they had. "Captain, they're regrouping," Sam, the communications officer, warned. "More ships are coming in fast." Mark gripped the controls tighter. He had hoped to create some chaos, to give them a chance to escape, but it was clear now that the battle wasn't over. The Lance had just become the most dangerous target in the galaxy. "We need to go on the offensive," Mark said, his voice sharp. "Ella, is the cannon ready again?" Ella's voice crackled through the comms, tense but focused. "It's charging. We need a little more time to get it back online. Maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Mark repeated, his mind racing. The Armada wouldn't give them 10 minutes. They needed to find a way to keep the enemy ships at bay, to give the cannon time to recharge. "We don't have 10 minutes, Mark said, thinking quickly. "We need to stall. Luke, can we create a decoy, something to confuse them?" Luke, the lead technician, turned from his station in the engine room. "A decoy. I can make a few modifications. We could deploy a series of signal jammers, make it look like there's more of us than there is. It won't last long, but it could buy us enough time to fire the cannon again." "Do it," Mark ordered. "Make it quick." The Lance shuddered as Luke and his team worked to set up the decoy system. Mark watched the enemy ships approach. They were closer now, and the vast fleet loomed in the distance. The Lance was just one small ship, outnumbered, outgunned, and in a race against time. "We're ready," Luke called out. "Deploying decoys now." With a series of beeps and flashes, the decoy system went live. The Lance sent out a series of false signals, making it appear as though there were multiple ships in different directions. The enemy fleet hesitated for a moment, unsure of which signal to follow. It was just enough time to throw them off balance. "Mark, the decoys are working," Sam called out from his station. "They're splitting up. We've got a chance." Mark didn't hesitate. "Ella, how much longer on the cannon?" 2 minutes, Ella replied. It'll be ready soon. The decoys had done their job, but Mark knew they couldn't rely on them for long. The Armada would figure out the ruse eventually. They had to finish this quickly. Mark's eyes scanned the battlefield. The enemy ships were scattered now, confused by the decoys, but it wouldn't take long for them to regroup. He had to act fast. "Sam, can you get a read on their formations?" Mark asked. "Already doing it, Captain," Sam replied. His fingers flew over the controls. "They're scattering, but they're all converging on us. They're trying to isolate us." Mark cursed under his breath. "Of course they are. They won't stop until we're destroyed." A sense of determination filled him. The Lance had survived this long, and they were going to fight until the end. "Ella, get that cannon online now. We don't have much time." As Mark gave the order, he felt the ship shudder again, this time from enemy fire. The decoys had been effective, but they wouldn't stop the fleet from closing in. "We're locked in," Mark said, his voice tight. "Prepare for the final strike. Everyone, hold on tight." Ella's voice came through, clear and steady. "The cannon is charged. I've got the target locked." Mark nodded, taking a deep breath. "Fire." The Lance's energy cannon roared to life once more, a beam of bright light cutting through space. It streaked toward the heart of the enemy fleet, a direct hit to the lead warship, which exploded in a blaze of fire and debris. The shockwave rippled through the remaining ships, throwing them off course. For a moment, there was chaos. The Armada's formation fell apart, their ships scattering in every direction, unsure of where the next attack would come from. Mark didn't waste a second. "Keep firing," he shouted. The Lance unleashed wave after wave of fire, each shot finding its mark. The enemy ships were falling, one by one, their armor torn apart by the powerful energy blasts. It was working. The Lance was winning. But Mark knew they couldn't keep this up for long. The energy cannon was powerful, but it couldn't keep firing forever. They had to finish this now. "Ella, any more shots left?" Mark asked, his voice growing urgent. "Last shot ready," Ella replied, her fingers flying over the console. Mark looked at the remaining ships. They were closing in fast. "Make it count." With one final brilliant flash, the cannon fired again, a blast so strong that it shattered the last enemy ship into pieces. For a long moment, the Lance was still. The battle was over. The battlefield was silent. The last of the enemy ships had been destroyed, their wreckage drifting in the vast emptiness of space. The Lance hovered amidst the debris, its crew exhausted but triumphant. Against all odds, they had done it. They had taken down the most powerful fleet the Empire had ever assembled. But Captain Mark knew the victory was bittersweet. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The dread Armada was only a small part of the Empire's strength. There were more fleets, more forces, and the Empire would not stop until humanity was crushed. "We did it." Ella's voice was barely a whisper, but the relief was clear in her words. She had been the one to charge the cannon, to guide them through the most dangerous moments of the battle. Mark nodded, but his mind was already shifting to what came next. "We've bought ourselves some time. That's all." Ella turned to face him. "What now, Captain?" "We regroup, prepare for the next fight," Mark said. "The Empire won't let this go. We've made an enemy of the entire galaxy." As the crew began to assess the damage to the Lance, Mark's thoughts were still with the Empire. The Empire's fleet had been massive, powerful beyond belief. They had faced overwhelming odds, and yet they had won. The destruction of the Inferno had sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks, but they couldn't afford to rest. The Lance was still a small ship, and they had only scratched the surface of the Empire's might. "Sam," Mark called, turning toward the communications officer. "How long until we're in range of the nearest Imperial fleet?" Sam worked quickly, tapping the controls. "Not long, Captain. Maybe a few hours at best." Mark looked out the view screen at the debris of the battle. They had won the fight, But the war was far from over. The next Imperial fleet could arrive at any moment. The Lance needed to be ready. They needed to find a safe place to regroup, a place where they could rest and plan their next move. "Captain," Luke said, his voice tinged with worry, "we've got some major damage. The engines are still functional, but not at full power. We'll need repairs before we can make a jump." "Do what you can, Luke," Mark replied. "We don't have the luxury of time." The crew worked quickly, each of them doing what they could to keep the ship operational. Mark moved to the map of the galaxy displayed on the screen. He traced a route with his finger, considering their options. There were a few places far from Imperial reach, hidden pockets of resistance and safe zones, but they weren't sure how long they could stay hidden. The Empire had vast resources and would stop at nothing to find them. "I think we should head to the outer rim," Ella suggested, standing next to him. "There are outposts there. They're small, but they're not known to the Empire." Mark looked at her thoughtfully. The outer rim was far from the Empire's main forces, but it was a dangerous place. There were no guarantees of safety out there. Still, it was their best option. "All right," Mark said finally. "Set a course for the outer rim. We'll lay low for a while and get the repairs we need. But we need to stay sharp. The Empire won't stop hunting us." As the Lance set its course for the distant edge of the galaxy, Mark couldn't help but feel a small flicker of hope. They had defeated the Dread Armada, but it was just the beginning. If they could hold on long enough, they might be able to make a real difference in the fight against the Empire. They had shown that humanity was not as weak as the Empire thought. They had proven that, no matter the odds, they could fight back. "We'll make it through this," Mark said to himself, as much for his own reassurance as for the crew's. The Lance flew silently through the stars, its crew ready for whatever came next. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Yet for the first time in a long while, Mark believed that maybe, just maybe, humanity had a real chance, and he would fight until the very end to see that chance realized. The Lance drifted through the cold, silent space of the outer rim. After hours of travel, the ship was still in one piece, though the crew was exhausted. They had barely survived the battle with the Dread Armada. And now, as they reached their destination, there was no sign of immediate danger. For the first time in days, Mark felt a small sense of relief. They had made it. "Captain, we've arrived," Sam's voice came over the comms. "There's an outpost nearby, just as you requested." Mark nodded, though his mind was already moving ahead. They had to rest, repair, and plan. The Empire would be searching for them, and hiding here wouldn't keep them safe for long. Still, it was a small victory. They had bought time. That's all they could do right now. "All right," Mark said, pushing away the worries for the moment. "Prepare to dock. Let's see what kind of help we can get from the outpost." The crew made their way to the docking bay. The outpost was small, built into a remote asteroid. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. As the Lance slowly docked, Mark couldn't help but think of all the battles yet to come. The Empire was still out there, a giant force determined to crush humanity. But maybe, just maybe, they could fight back. When the hatch opened, Mark stepped onto the rocky surface of the outpost. The outpost's inhabitants were a mix of survivors, rebels, smugglers, and outcasts. They had all found refuge in the farthest corners of the galaxy, away from the reach of the Empire. Mark was greeted by a few of the outpost leaders, who eyed the Lance with interest. "Looks like you've seen a fight," one of them said, a gruff man named Ryan. "We don't get many visitors out here." "Not visitors," Mark replied, his voice steady. "We're survivors. We need help. Repairs. Supplies." Ryan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We can help, but it won't be easy. The Empire has spies everywhere. You can't stay here forever." Mark knew this, of course, but they needed to stay hidden, to rebuild, to figure out their next move. They couldn't do it alone. They had to join forces with others. people who were willing to fight. "We don't need to stay forever," Mark said, looking out at the horizon of the asteroid. "Just long enough to plan our next move." As the repairs to the lance began, Mark gathered his crew. They needed to think. They needed to prepare for what came next. "We've had a small victory," Mark began, addressing the crew. "But the Empire is still out there. The Dread Armada is gone, but they have other fleets, more resources. This is far from over. Our next steps are crucial. We can't hide forever." Ella spoke up. "We need to strike back." Mark looked at her. She was right. Hiding was only a temporary solution. The crew of the Lance had shown what humanity was capable of, but there was still so much to be done. They couldn't just wait for the Empire to make its next move. "We strike when the time is right," Mark said firmly. "We need to find more allies, more people willing to fight. This war is far bigger than just one ship." Luke nodded. "We've got the technology. We know what they're capable of. If we keep going, we can take the fight to them." Mark felt a surge of determination. The Lance had been part of something incredible. They had taken on the Dread Armada, the mightiest force the Empire had, and come out victorious. Now they needed to inspire others, to show the galaxy that humanity could stand up to the Empire. "We've started something," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "This is just the beginning. The Lance won't be the only one fighting. We're going to unite those who are willing to stand against the Empire." As Mark looked out over the barren expanse of space, a sense of resolve filled him. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The Lance was only the first spark in what would become a raging fire. Humanity had proved that they could fight back, that they could survive. And now they would rise again, stronger and more united than ever before. "This is our moment," Mark said to his crew. "We're going to take the fight to them, and we're going to win. For humanity." And with that, the crew of the Lance prepared for the next chapter in their journey. They were ready. They had survived the impossible, and now they were ready to face whatever came next.